My name is Nora Quinn, and I was 31 years old when I gave my sister my kidney, and 32 years old when I found out what she had done with the year I spent recovering from giving it. I want to start with the surgery, because the surgery is the foundation of everything, and without understanding what it cost me, the rest of the story does not have its full weight. My sister, Maya, was 34 when she was diagnosed with end-stage renal disease. I was 31. We had grown up in the same house on Whitmore Street, shared a bedroom until I was 12, argued about the television and the bathroom, and all the small daily frictions of two people in close quarters, and had arrived at our 30s with the kind of relationship that is not particularly close, but is not estranged either. The relationship of sisters who love each other in the general way, without necessarily knowing each other in the specific way. When the diagnosis came, I drove to the hospital, and I sat across from Maya and her doctor, and I listened to what end-stage renal disease means in practical terms, which is that the kidneys have stopped functioning adequately, and that without either dialysis indefinitely or a transplant, the prognosis is serious and the timeline is uncertain. I said, "Can I be tested as a donor?" The doctor said, "We can discuss that option." Maya said, "Nora, you do not have to." I said, "I know I do not have to." I said, "Let me be tested." I was a compatible donor. The tests came back within 2 weeks, and I was a match. And I sat with that information for 48 hours and made a decision that I do not regret, and that I would make again, and that was answered in a way I could not have anticipated, and that I am still, in some moments, trying to fully understand. The surgery was on a Thursday morning in February, 6 hours. I spent 4 days in the hospital and 6 weeks recovering at home, and I lost 7 pounds I did not have to lose and gained a scar that runs along my left side that I will carry for the rest of my life. Maya recovered well. Her body accepted the kidney, her numbers improved, her doctors were encouraged. I attended her 3-month follow-up with her and sat in the waiting room while she was examined, and felt in that waiting room the specific, quiet satisfaction of a person who has done something genuinely hard and genuinely right. 8 months after the surgery, I received a letter in the mail from a real estate firm I did not recognize about a property on Whitmore Street. Before I tell you what that letter said, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city in the comments. I love knowing where you are when you listen to this. Now let me tell you what my sister did while I was still carrying a surgical scar. The letter was a closing confirmation. I want to be precise about what that means, because precision is the thing that matters here, and vagueness would let the weight of it slip. A closing confirmation is the document sent after a real estate transaction has been completed to all parties listed on the sale. It confirms the sale price, the date of closing, and the signatures of all parties who authorized the transaction. The property was our parents' house on Whitmore Street. Our parents had died 3 years earlier, my father first and my mother 14 months after, and they had left the house equally to Maya and me in a will that was straightforward and clearly written, and that I had understood to mean that the house was jointly owned, and that any decision about it required both of our signatures and both of our consent. The closing confirmation showed a sale price, a closing date 3 weeks earlier, and 2 signatures: Maya Quinn and Nora Quinn. I had not signed anything. I had not been contacted by any real estate firm. I had not been told the house was listed. I had not been told the house was under contract. I had not been told the house had a buyer. I had not been told there was a closing date. I had not been told anything. I called the real estate firm first. I identified myself, and I told them I had received a closing confirmation for a property and that I had not been party to the transaction. The agent I spoke to had the careful, neutral voice of someone who understands immediately that a problem has arrived and is managing their response to it. She said, "Miss Quinn, your signature is on the authorization documents." I said, "I did not sign any authorization documents." She said, "Can you hold?" I held. She came back and said, "The signatures were notarized." I said, "The signature on those documents is not mine." There was a silence. She said, I am going to need to escalate this. I said, please do. I called the title company next. Same conversation, same silence at the end of it, same careful voice of a professional who understands that the situation is significantly more serious than it appeared when the transaction was processed. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Frances, who I had used for contract work and who had the direct, efficient manner of someone who absorbs bad news quickly and moves immediately to what can be done about it. I told her everything. She said, Nora, what you are describing is deed fraud and signature forgery. She said, both are felonies. She said, I need you to do nothing else until we have spoken properly. I said, when can you see me? She said, tomorrow morning. I said, okay. I put the phone down. I sat at my kitchen table. I held the closing confirmation in my hands. My name was on it. My signature was on it. I had not written that signature. My sister was alive because of a decision I had made on a Thursday morning in February, and she had used the year I spent recovering from that decision to sell the house our parents had left us both without telling me and without my consent and with a signature that was not mine. I sat at that table for a long time. I did not call Maya. I thought about calling her. I decided that the call I needed to make first was to Frances, and that everything else came after I had the information I needed to say what needed to be said correctly and completely, and in a way that could not be revised later. Frances and I met the following morning. She reviewed everything I had: the closing confirmation, the will establishing joint ownership, my own records showing I had never been contacted by the real estate firm or the title company during the listing or the sale process. She requested the full transaction file from the real estate firm that afternoon, and they provided it, with the specific, careful cooperation of a company that understands it may have participated, without knowing it, in a fraudulent transaction and wants to be on the right side of what comes next. The file contained everything: the listing agreement, the purchase offer, the accepted contract, the closing documents, and the notarized signature authorization that bore my name. Frances looked at the authorization document for a long time. She said, Nora, do you have anything with your signature on it from around this period, something dated? I said, yes, and I brought her 3 things: a signed lease renewal from my apartment from 8 months prior, a signed work contract from the previous year, and a birthday card I had sent Maya 3 months after the surgery, signed in my handwriting, which I had kept a copy of because I am a person who keeps copies of things. She compared them. She said, these are clearly different. The loops in your signature are specific. The way you form the N and the Q are distinctive. She said whoever signed this authorization document had access to your signature but did not replicate it accurately. She said a handwriting expert will confirm this. I said, Maya had access to my signature? Frances said, I know. She said, I want you to understand what the options are before you decide what you want to do. She said, you can pursue this civilly, seeking the return of your share of the sales proceeds plus damages. You can file a criminal complaint for forgery and deed fraud, which is a separate track, or you can do both. She said, what you cannot do is do nothing, because doing nothing allows the transaction to stand as completed and allows the proceeds to remain entirely with Maya. I said, what did the house sell for? She told me the number. It was significant. Not a fortune, but significant. The kind of number that represents years of my parents' careful, ordinary living distilled into an asset that had been sold without my knowledge for a check that had gone to my sister's account. I took a deep breath. I said, what is my share? She told me. I said, file everything, all of it. She said, civil and criminal? I said, all of it. She said, Nora, this is going to be difficult with a family member. I said, Frances, I have a surgical scar on my left side that I am going to carry for the rest of my life because I made a decision about my sister in 48 hours. She made her decision about me over the course of a year. Both decisions are in the record now." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I will start the filings today." Maya called me 4 days after Frances sent the formal legal notification. I had expected the call to come sooner. 4 days suggested she had received the notification and had spent 4 days deciding how to handle it and had landed on calling me directly, which I interpreted as either genuine remorse or the calculation that a direct conversation might produce a withdrawal of the complaint before it went further. I did not know which it was at the time. I know now. Her voice, when she answered, had the quality of a person who has rehearsed what they are going to say and is delivering it under significant emotional pressure that is making the rehearsed version difficult to maintain. She said, "Nora." I said, "Maya." She said, "I need to explain." I said, "Okay." She said the house was sitting there and the taxes were due and she had been struggling financially since the surgery, the medical bills had been significant and she had not been able to work at full capacity, and she had looked at the house and she had thought that selling was the practical solution, and she had intended to tell me and to give me my share, and she had just not gotten around to doing it before the closing happened, and then it was done and she did not know how to bring it up. I listened to all of it. I listened without interrupting, because interrupting would have shortened the account, and I wanted the full account. When she finished, I said, "Maya, I have a question." She said, "Okay." I said, "Why is my signature on the closing documents?" She was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted the way I had been counting silences in important conversations since all of this started, because silences are information. She said, "I needed both signatures for the sale." I said, "And?" She said, "I could not reach you." I said, "My phone has not changed in 3 years." She said, "I did not want to upset you." I said, "So you forged my signature on a legal document instead?" She did not answer. I said, "Maya, you forged my signature on a real estate closing document. That is a crime, not a misunderstanding, not a family disagreement. A crime with a specific name and a specific legal consequence, and Frances has filed the documentation with the appropriate authorities." She said, "Nora, please." She said, "You are my sister." I said, "I know I am your sister." I said, "I am also the person who gave you a kidney 8 months before you sold our parents' house without telling me and without my signature." She started crying. I said, "I know you are in a difficult position." I said, "I was in a difficult position on a Thursday morning in February, and I made a decision in 48 hours, and I did not ask you whether it was convenient." She cried. I said, "My attorney will be in touch about the resolution options." She said, "Nora, please do not do this." I said, "Maya, I already did." I said, "You should talk to an attorney." I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table with my hand on the phone, and I thought about the surgery and the recovery and the 6 weeks and the 7 pounds and the scar, and I thought about a closing confirmation from a real estate firm I did not recognize, and I thought, you gave her the thing that kept her alive, and she looked at everything you shared and decided it was hers to sell. I had no more words for that. I had documentation. That was enough. The resolution took 9 months. I want to be honest about that because 9 months is a long time, and the honest version of a long process is more useful than the version where justice arrives quickly and cleanly and without the specific exhaustion of a legal process that requires your full attention across 3 seasons of your life. The civil case produced a judgment in my favor. My share of the sale proceeds, plus interest, plus the legal costs that the fraud had required me to incur. The amount was transferred to my account on a Wednesday afternoon, and I looked at it for a moment. And then I paid my attorney and put the remainder in savings, because it was not the point, and had never been the point, and treating it as the point would have made me someone I did not want to be. The criminal matter was handled separately. Maya entered a guilty plea to a reduced charge through her attorney. The specific terms I am not going to detail here because some things belong to the legal record and not to a story told online. What I will tell you is that there were consequences, and that the consequences were real, and that they were not administered by me, but by a process I had put in motion, and that operated independently of my feelings about it once I had filed the complaint. Maya and I have not spoken since the phone call. I do not know if we will speak again. I think about that sometimes, not with anger, with the specific grief of understanding that a relationship can be genuinely over, and that genuinely over is different from broken. Broken implies a possibility of repair. Some things are not broken, they are finished, and finishing is its own kind of truth. I think about the surgery often, not with regret. I would make the same decision again. I want to be clear about that because I think it is important. The decision to donate was mine, and it was right, and it came from who I am and what I believe, and what Maya did afterward does not change the rightness of that decision. It changes what I know about her. Those are different things. I think about my parents' house on Whittimer Street. Someone else lives there now. I drove past it once, 6 months after the sale closed, and I sat in the car in front of it for a moment, and I thought about my mother in the kitchen and my father at the desk, and the bedroom Maya and I had shared until I was 12, and I let myself feel all of it for exactly as long as I needed to, and then I drove away. The scar is still there. It will always be there. I have stopped thinking of it as a reminder of what happened and started thinking of it as a record of who I am, of the decision I made in 48 hours, of the kind of person I was on a Thursday morning in February when my sister needed something and I had it to give. What she did with the year after that is also in the record. Both things are true. Both things are permanent, and I have decided that the one I am going to carry forward is mine. If you have ever given someone the most important thing you had and discovered too late what they valued it as, this story is for you. You are not alone, and you are allowed to hold both things at once, the love that made you give and the clarity that came after. Both are yours. That is my story. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.